In Chapter 10 of David Copperfield, after Clara's funeral, Miss Murdstone immediately fires Peggotty, who decides to go to Yarmouth, where her brother lives. She promises to visit David Copperfield once a week. David learns he will not return to school, and he goes to Yarmouth with Peggotty for a visit. Little Emily is growing up. She's now attending school and isn't as carefree as before. After dinner, Mr. Peggotty asks about James Steerforth, and David sings the praises of his friend's accomplishments, good looks, charm, and nobility. Emily listens with rapt attention. Peggotty and Barkis have a quiet marriage ceremony. Peggotty tells David there's a bedroom for him in their house whenever he's able to visit. David returns to Blunderstone and is ignored by the Murdstones. One day, Mr. Murdstone is visited by Mr. Quinian, manager of the counting house of Murdstone and Grinby's, which is involved in the wine trade. Mr. Murdstone tells David he won't be continuing his education. Instead, David will now work in the counting house in London. Mr. Murdstone will provide for his lodging and clothing, but David will have to earn enough to pay for his own food and other expenses. The next morning, David leaves with Mr. Quinian. In Chapter 11 of David Copperfield, 10-year-old David begins to work at Murdstone and Grinby's, a dilapidated, rat-infested warehouse where he washes, labels, and packs bottles. He's miserable, feeling that the little education he's received and his hopes for the future are all draining away. Still, he does his work without complaint. Nicknamed the Little Gent at the warehouse, David has little in common with the other boys. He has a room in the home of Mr. and Mrs. Micawber and their 4 young children. Mr. Micawber is unemployed but hopeful, but his family is constantly hounded by creditors. Their mood shifts from despair over their debts to joy and celebration the moment they can afford to pay for a dinner. At one point, David helps Mrs. Micawber pawn their household goods so they can feed the family. But soon, Mr. Micawber is arrested and sent to the King's Bench prison, a debtor's prison. The family moves right into the prison with him. David rents a room nearby and visits the family often, spending his free time walking the streets of London, making up stories about the people he observes there. In Chapter 12 of David Copperfield, Mr. Micawber is released from prison and the family moves to Plymouth, where there's a chance of Mr. Micawber finding employment. David can't bear the thought of staying in London after the Micawbers leave and decides to run away and try to find his great aunt, Miss Betsy. He borrows some money from Peggotty for the trip, and he hires a young man with a donkey cart to help him move his box of belongings to the stagecoach office. But the young man runs away with David's box and his money, and after a futile chase, David sets out on foot towards Dover.